The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the general store, and Lillian Greene pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Through the film of dirt and grime, she could see them, a dozen men standing in a loose cluster near the hitching post, their faces a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that made her stomach turn. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to Rock Springs, Wyoming, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. And now, in the summer heat of 1882, she was about to meet the man who had sent for her. The driver climbed down with a grunt, and she heard him say something to the crowd, his voice too low to make out the words. Then silence. A terrible, yawning silence that stretched on and on until she thought she might scream. The door swung open, and the driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, extended his hand to help her down. Lillian took it, her legs trembling as her boots touched the packed earth of the main street. The men stared at her, their eyes moving from her face to her travel-worn dress, taking in every detail. She lifted her chin, refusing to show fear, even though her insides felt like water. "This here is Miss Greene," the driver announced, gesturing toward her with his hat. "Come all the way from Boston to marry Samuel Winters." "Where is Sam?" An older man with silver hair stepped forward, removing his hat and twisting it in his hands. His face was weathered and kind, but his eyes held a sorrow that made Lillian's breath catch. "Sam passed 3 weeks ago," he said quietly. "Fever took him. We sent a telegram, but I reckon it did not reach you in time." The world tilted. Lillian grabbed the edge of the stagecoach to steady herself, her vision swimming. Dead. The man who had sent for her, who had promised her a home and a future, was dead. She had sold everything she owned to buy her passage west, had burned every bridge in Boston, and now she stood in a dusty Wyoming town with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. "I am sorry, miss," the silver-haired man continued. "If we had known you were still coming, we would have tried to stop you. This is a hard thing, and we are all real sorry about it." "What do I do now?" Lillian heard herself ask, her voice small and foreign to her own ears. The men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. No one spoke. No one offered a solution. She could see the answer in their faces. They did not know what to do with her any more than she knew what to do with herself. She was alone, stranded in a place where women were scarce and options were scarcer still. "Can she go back?" someone asked. The driver scratched his beard. "Stage does not head east again for another week, and even then it costs money. Money." Lillian had exactly $3.27 left to her name. Not enough for a stagecoach ticket. Not enough for much of anything. She felt the eyes of the men on her, assessing, judging, and something else. Some of them looked at her with pity, others with a hunger that made her skin crawl. "Well, she cannot just stand in the street," another man said. "What about the boarding house?" "Full up," someone replied. "Mining crew came through yesterday." Lillian's throat tightened. She would not cry. She had not cried when her parents died of cholera 2 years ago, had not cried when the bank foreclosed on their home, had not cried through any of the hardships that had led her to this moment. She would not start now. "Maybe we could find her work," the silver-haired man suggested. "Martha over at the restaurant might need help." "Martha can barely pay the girl she has now," another voice said. The conversation swirled around her, the men discussing her fate as though she were a piece of furniture that needed to be stored somewhere. Humiliation burned in her chest, hot and bitter. She had come here to build a life, to escape the suffocating poverty and loneliness of her existence in Boston, and instead she had walked into a nightmare. "I will marry her." The voice cut through the chatter like a knife. Deep and steady, with an edge of determination that made everyone turn. Lillian looked up and saw a man stepping forward from the back of the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty work clothes and a leather vest, and there was a quiet strength about him that made her breath hitch in a different way. "Isaac," the silver-haired man said, surprise evident in his tone. "You do not have to do this." "I know," the man named Isaac replied. His gaze met Lillian's, and she saw something in his expression that she could not quite name. Not pity, not hunger, something gentler. "But she came all this way expecting a home and a husband. Seems wrong to leave her with nothing." "You do not even know her," someone protested. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Neither did Sam. That is how this works, is it not? She took a chance coming out here. I reckon I can take one too." Lillian stared at him, her mind racing. He was offering her a way out, a solution to the impossible situation she found herself in. But marriage was not something to be entered into lightly, especially not with a complete stranger. Yet what choice did she have? The alternative was destitution, possibly worse. "What is your name?" Isaac asked, addressing her directly for the first time. "Lillian Greene," she managed, her voice stronger than she expected. "Isaac Flint," he said, and the corner of his mouth quirked up in something that might have been a smile. "I run a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, but it is a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. If you are willing, we can go see Reverend Parker right now and make it official." "Right now?" The words came out as a squeak. "No point in waiting," Isaac said. "Unless you have objections." Did she have objections? 1,000 of them, but none of them mattered as much as survival. Lillian took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and met his gaze. "I have no objections." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, relief maybe, or approval. He turned to the silver-haired man. "Tom, can you fetch the Reverend? Tell him we need him at the church in 10 minutes. Tom nodded and hurried off, his boots kicking up dust as he went. The rest of the crowd began to disperse, some of the men muttering to each other, casting glances back at Lillian and Isaac. Within moments, they were alone in the street, the late afternoon sun beating down on them. "I appreciate what you are doing," Lillian said carefully, "but I must ask why. You do not know anything about me." Isaac shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I know you are brave enough to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. That is more than most folks can say. And I know what it is like to be alone with nowhere to go. Figured I could help." There was a story there, hidden beneath the simple words, but Lillian did not press. "What should I know about you?" she asked instead. "I work hard. I keep my word. And I will not expect anything from you that you are not willing to give." His eyes held hers, making sure she understood. "This can be a marriage in name only if that is what you want. You will have your own room, your own space. I just thought it seemed right to offer you a way forward." The tightness in Lillian's chest eased slightly. "That is more than fair," she said quietly. "Thank you." Isaac picked up her trunk, which the driver had deposited on the wooden sidewalk, and gestured toward the small white church at the end of the street. "We should head over. Reverend Parker does not like to be kept waiting." They walked in silence, and Lillian tried to process everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. She had expected to step off that stagecoach and into a new life, but she had never imagined it would happen quite like this. Isaac Flint was nothing like the letters she had exchanged with Samuel Winters. Samuel had been verbose, almost flowery in his writing, describing his home and his hopes in great detail. Isaac was quiet, measured, his words carefully chosen. She did not know which she preferred. The church was small and simple, with plain wooden pews and a cross hanging above the altar. Reverend Parker was waiting for them, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a patient expression. Tom stood beside him, along with a woman Lillian did not recognize, presumably there to serve as a witness. "Isaac," the Reverend said, his tone neutral. "Tom tells me you wish to be married." "Yes, sir," Isaac replied. "This is Lillian Greene." She was supposed to marry Sam Winters, but seeing as that is no longer possible, I am stepping in. The Reverend studied them both, his gaze sharp. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly. Are you both certain this is what you want?" Lillian hesitated, then nodded. "I am certain." "As am I," Isaac said firmly. "Very well." Reverend Parker opened his Bible and began the ceremony. The words washed over Lillian, familiar and strange all at once. She had never imagined her wedding would be like this, hasty and spare, with no flowers or music or friends to witness it. But life rarely turned out the way one imagined, and she had learned long ago to adapt. "Do you, Isaac Flint, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Isaac said, his voice steady. "And do you, Lillian Greene, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Lillian swallowed hard. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Parker closed his Bible. "You may kiss the bride." Isaac glanced at Lillian, a question in his eyes. She gave a small nod and he leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a brief, chaste kiss. It was over in a heartbeat, but Lillian felt the warmth of it all the way to her toes. They signed the register, and Tom clapped Isaac on the back, congratulating them. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Parker, gave Lillian a warm smile and wished her well. Then they were outside again, the sun starting to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. "We should head to the ranch," Isaac said. "It is a bit of a ride, and I would like to get there before dark." He led her to a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses and helped her up onto the seat before loading her trunk in the back. Lillian settled herself, smoothing her skirts, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. She was married, to a man she had met less than an hour ago. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Isaac climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. They rolled out of town, the wooden buildings giving way to open prairie. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, all rolling hills and sagebrush, with the mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth. Lillian had never seen anything like it. Boston had been all brick and cobblestones, crowded streets and narrow alleys. This was vast and empty, stretching out in every direction as far as the eye could see. "It is different from what you are used to, I imagine," Isaac said, breaking the silence. "Very different," Lillian admitted, "but not in a bad way. It is beautiful." "It can be harsh," Isaac said. "Winters are hard and the summers are dry, but there is something about this place that gets into your blood, makes you feel alive." "How long have you been here?" Lillian asked. 5 years. I came out from Missouri after the war." He glanced at her. "I fought for the Union. Lost my whole family in a raid while I was gone. When I came back, there was nothing left, so I headed west, figured I would start over." "I am sorry," Lillian said softly. "That must have been terrible." Isaac's jaw tightened. "It was a long time ago. I have made my peace with it." They lapsed into silence again, and Lillian turned her attention to the landscape. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cooling, and she wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. She thought about Isaac's story, about the pain he had endured and the strength it must have taken to rebuild his life from nothing. She understood that kind of loss, that kind of determination. Maybe they were not so different after all. The ranch came into view as the last light faded from the sky. It was modest, a one-story house with a covered porch, a barn, and a couple of outbuildings. There was a corral with several horses, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It was simple, but it looked sturdy and well kept, a testament to Isaac's hard work. Isaac pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Lillian down. "It is not much," he said again, almost apologetically, "but it is home." "It is wonderful," Lillian said, and meant it. After the uncertainty of the past few hours, the ranch felt like a haven, a place where she could finally breathe. Isaac carried her trunk inside and set it down in the main room. The house was clean and sparsely furnished, with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, and a couple of worn armchairs. There were 2 doors leading off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "That one is yours," Isaac said, pointing to the door on the right. "I will take the other. There is a wash basin and pitcher in there, and I will bring in some water so you can freshen up. Supper will be ready in about an hour." "You cook?" Lillian asked, surprised. Isaac gave her a wry smile. "When you live alone, you learn. It is nothing fancy, but it is edible." Lillian laughed, the sound startling her. It had been so long since she had laughed that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. "I can cook," she offered. "If you would like, I can take over that responsibility. We can figure out how to divide things up as we go," Isaac said. "For tonight, just rest. I know you have had a long day." That was an understatement. Lillian felt like she had lived a lifetime in the span of a few hours. She nodded, suddenly exhausted, and retreated to the room Isaac had indicated. It was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and she opened it, pulling out a clean nightgown and her hairbrush. There was a gentle knock on the door, and Isaac entered carrying a pitcher of water. He set it on the washstand and paused, his gaze traveling around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said. "Thank you," Lillian said, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not stepped forward." Isaac met her eyes, and for a moment the walls he had built around himself seemed to lower. "You would have figured something out," he said. "You strike me as the kind of woman who does not give up easily." "I try not to," Lillian said, "but I am grateful all the same." He nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Lillian sank down onto the bed, her hands shaking. She was married to Isaac Flint, a man who had offered her kindness when no one else would, who had given her a home and asked for nothing in return. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, Lillian woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly, braiding her hair and pinning it up, then made her way to the main room. Isaac was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the tiredness in his eyes as though he had not slept well. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Isaac replied. "I made some oatmeal. Hope that is all right." "It is perfect," Lillian said. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. Isaac joined her a moment later with 2 bowls of oatmeal, and they ate in companionable silence. It was strange, this domestic routine with a man she barely knew, but it was also oddly comforting. "I need to check on the cattle today," Isaac said after a while. "You are welcome to come along if you want, or you can stay here and get settled, whatever you prefer." "I would like to come," Lillian said. "If I am going to live here, I should learn about the ranch." Isaac nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. "All right. We will leave in about half an hour. Wear something you do not mind getting dirty." Lillian changed into her oldest dress and a pair of sturdy boots, then met Isaac outside. He had saddled 2 horses, a large bay for himself and a smaller chestnut mare for her. Lillian had ridden a little as a child, but it had been years, and she felt a flutter of nervousness as she approached the mare. "Her name is Rosie," Isaac said. "She is gentle. Just keep a firm grip on the reins and let her follow my horse. She will do most of the work." Lillian nodded and allowed Isaac to help her into the saddle. She adjusted her skirts, trying to find a comfortable position, and took the reins. Isaac swung up onto his own horse with an ease that spoke of years of practice, and they set off across the prairie. The morning was cool and clear, the sky a brilliant blue. They rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves on the hard, packed earth. Lillian found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, her nervousness fading. There was something peaceful about being out here, away from the noise and crowds of the city. They reached the herd after about an hour. The cattle were scattered across a wide meadow, grazing peacefully. Isaac dismounted and walked among them, checking their condition, looking for signs of injury or illness. Lillian watched him, impressed by his competence and care. He clearly loved this work, and it showed in every movement. "How many head do you have?" she asked when he returned. "About 50, Isaac said. "It is not a huge operation, but it is enough to make a living. I sell beef to the mining camps and the railroad crews. It keeps me busy." "You manage it all yourself?" Lillian asked. "Mostly," Isaac said. "I hire help during roundup and branding, but the rest of the time it is just me. Or I guess it is just us now." The words hung in the air between them, a reminder of the new reality they were navigating. Lillian felt a pang of something she could not quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also a strange sense of responsibility. Isaac had taken her in, had given her a place in his life, and she wanted to prove that she was worth it. "I can help," she said. "I do not know much about ranching, but I am willing to learn." Isaac studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We will start with the basics and go from there." Over the next few weeks, Lillian threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. Isaac was a patient teacher, showing her how to feed the horses, muck out the stalls, mend fences, and tend the vegetable garden that grew behind the house. She learned to milk the cow, to churn butter, to preserve vegetables for the winter. Her hands, once soft and pale, grew calloused and strong. Her body, unused to physical labor, ached at the end of each day, but she welcomed the exhaustion. It meant she was doing something, contributing, earning her place. Isaac watched her efforts with quiet approval, and slowly a routine emerged. They rose early, worked through the day, and shared simple meals in the evening. They talked more as the days passed, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Lillian learned that Isaac had a dry sense of humor and a love of books, that he was kind to animals and generous to his neighbors. She also learned that he carried a deep well of loneliness, a wound that had never fully healed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Isaac turned to her. "You have worked hard," he said. "I appreciate everything you have done." "I want to pull my weight," Lillian said. "This is my home now, too." Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said, "It is strange, is it not? A month ago we were strangers. Now we are living together, working together, building a life together. I never expected things to turn out this way." "Neither did I," Lillian admitted. "But I am glad they did. I think I would have been miserable with Samuel Winters." Isaac looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Why do you say that?" His letters were full of grand promises and flowery language, but there was no substance to them. "I had the feeling he wanted a wife as a status symbol, not as a partner." Lillian hesitated, then added, "You are different. You see me as a person, not just a convenience." "You are a person," Isaac said simply. "A strong, capable person who deserves to be treated with respect." Something warm unfurled in Lillian's chest, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. She looked at Isaac, really looked at him, and saw not just the man who had saved her, but someone she was beginning to care for. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. As summer gave way to fall, the bond between them deepened. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized, their conversations easy. Lillian found herself looking forward to their evenings on the porch, to the sound of Isaac's voice, to the way he smiled when she said something that amused him. She noticed little things about him, the way he always made sure her coffee was hot in the morning, the way he left wildflowers on the kitchen table, the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. One crisp October morning, they rode out to check on the cattle and found that one of the cows had gone into labor. Isaac dismounted quickly, assessing the situation. "She is having trouble," he said. "I am going to have to help her." Lillian watched as Isaac knelt beside the cow, his hands gentle but firm as he worked. It was a long, tense process, but finally, a calf slid free, wet and shaking. Isaac cleared its nose and mouth, and the calf let out a weak bleat. The cow lowed softly and began licking her baby clean. "That was amazing," Lillian breathed. Isaac looked up at her, his face flushed with exertion and something else. "New life is always amazing," he said. "It reminds you that no matter how hard things get, there is always hope." Their eyes met, and Lillian felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in Isaac's gaze, a tenderness that made her breath catch. She wanted to say something, to tell him what she was feeling, but the words stuck in her throat. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, charged with unspoken emotions. When they reached the house, Isaac helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist. Lillian looked up at him, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But then he stepped back, his expression shuddered. "I should tend to the horses," he said, his voice rough. Lillian nodded, disappointment flooding through her. She went inside and busied herself with supper, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Did Isaac feel the same way she did? Or was she reading too much into a simple moment? That night, as they sat down to eat, the tension between them was palpable. Isaac was quieter than usual, his gaze distant. Lillian wanted to ask what he was thinking, but she was afraid of the answer. Finally, Isaac set down his fork and looked at her. "Lillian, I need to say something." Her heart hammered. "All right. When we got married, I told you it could be a marriage in name only, that I would not expect anything from you." He paused, his jaw working. "But the truth is, I have come to care for you, more than I thought possible, and I do not know what to do with that." Lillian's breath left her in a rush. "You care for me?" "Yes," Isaac said, his voice raw. "I think I started caring for you the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, so brave and determined despite everything. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more. But I do not want to pressure you. If you do not feel the same way, I will respect that. I just needed you to know." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "Isaac, I care for you too. I have for weeks now. I just did not know how to tell you." Relief flooded Isaac's face. He stood and crossed to her, pulling her to her feet. "You mean it?" he asked, his hands cupping her face. "I mean it," Lillian whispered. Isaac kissed her then, a real kiss, deep and full of all the emotions they had been holding back. Lillian melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her heart soaring. This was what she had been searching for, this connection, this sense of belonging. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid you would say no," he admitted. "I could never say no to you," Lillian said. You saved me, Isaac. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too, Isaac said. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came into my life. You made this house a home. They spent the rest of the evening wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing, making plans for the future. That night, Lillian did not sleep in her own room. She slept beside Isaac, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It felt like coming home. The winter that followed was harsh, just as Isaac had warned. Snow piled high around the ranch and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. But inside, there was warmth and laughter. Lillian and Isaac grew closer with each passing day, their love deepening into something solid and unshakable. They learned each other's rhythms, their likes and dislikes, their fears and dreams. One particularly cold night they sat by the fire, a blanket draped over their laps. Isaac was reading aloud from a book of poetry, his voice low and soothing. Lillian rested her head on his shoulder, utterly content. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not stepped forward that day?" Isaac asked suddenly. Lillian considered the question. "I try not to," she said. "It frightens me to think about it. I was so lost, so desperate, I do not know what I would have done." "You would have survived," Isaac said firmly. "You are too strong to do otherwise." "Maybe," Lillian said, "but I am glad I did not have to find out." "I am glad you were there." Isaac set the book aside and pulled her closer. "I am glad, too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lillian Flint." Hearing her new name still gave Lillian a thrill. She tilted her face up to his and kissed him, slow and sweet. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Spring came, and with it, new life. The cattle had calves, the garden began to bloom, and Lillian discovered she was with child. She told Isaac one morning over breakfast, her heart in her throat, unsure how he would react. Isaac stared at her, his eyes wide. "A baby," he said, his voice choked. Lillian nodded. "Are you happy?" Isaac let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "Happy? I am over the moon. We are going to have a baby." He set her down gently, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes shining. "Are you all right? Do you need to see a doctor?" "I am fine," Lillian laughed. "I feel wonderful, tired but wonderful." Isaac could not stop grinning. He spent the rest of the day floating around the ranch, telling the horses and the cattle and anyone who would listen that he was going to be a father. Lillian watched him with a full heart, marveling at how much her life had changed in less than a year. The months passed in a haze of preparation. Isaac built a cradle, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Lillian sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced ease. The women from town, who had been standoffish at first, warmed to her and brought gifts, advice, and well wishes. She was no longer the unwanted male bride. She was Isaac's wife, a part of the community. One warm August evening, Lillian went into labor. Isaac rode to town to fetch the midwife, his face pale with worry. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lillian thought she might not make it through. But Isaac was by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, his love a lifeline. Finally, just as the sun was rising, their son was born. He was small and perfect, with a thatch of dark hair and lungs that worked just fine. Isaac held him with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," he whispered, "just like his mother." "What should we name him?" Lillian asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Isaac thought for a moment, then said, "How about Daniel? It was my father's name." "Daniel Flint," Lillian said, testing the name. "I love it." They settled into the rhythms of parenthood, the sleepless nights and the endless feedings, the worry and the wonder. Isaac was a devoted father, doting on his son with a tenderness that made Lillian fall even more in love with him. Watching him cradle Daniel, singing him soft lullabies. She knew she had made the right choice that day in Rock Springs. The years rolled by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their son's life. Daniel grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and fearless, exploring every inch of the ranch with wide-eyed enthusiasm. He adored his father, following him everywhere, mimicking his every move. Isaac taught him to ride, to rope, to care for the animals. Lillian taught him his letters and numbers, read him stories, and instilled in him a love of learning. When Daniel was 3, Lillian found herself expecting again. This time, it was a girl born on a snowy December night. They named her Sarah, and she was the image of Lillian, with her green eyes and delicate features. Isaac was just as smitten with his daughter as he was with his son, cradling her with infinite care, singing her the same lullabies. The ranch prospered under Isaac's careful management. He expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a new barn. Lillian started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in town, and the extra income allowed them to make improvements to the house. They added a second story with more bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a parlor for entertaining. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors and friends. They hosted dances and dinners, celebrated holidays and birthdays. Lillian loved the bustle and noise, the sense of community that had been so lacking in her life in Boston. She had found her place, her purpose, and she was happier than she had ever dreamed possible. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Daniel and Sarah play in the yard, Isaac turned to Lillian. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived in Rock Springs?" he asked. "All the time," Lillian said. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It does," Isaac agreed. "I remember standing there, watching you step off that stagecoach, and thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I knew in that moment that I had to help you. I did not know it would lead to this, but I am so glad it did." "So am I," Lillian said, reaching for his hand. "You gave me everything, Isaac. A home, a family, a future. I love you more than words can say." "I love you too," Isaac said, lifting her hand to his lips. "You made me whole again, Lillian. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel ran up to them, his face flushed with excitement, Sarah toddling after him. Isaac scooped them both up, one in each arm, and Lillian laughed at the picture they made. "Come on," she said. "Let us get these two ready for bed." Bedtime was a ritual they both cherished. Isaac carried the children inside while Lillian warmed milk and gathered their nightclothes. They washed faces and hands, changed into pajamas, and tucked the children into their beds. Isaac told them a story, his voice low and soothing, while Lillian sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee. When the children were asleep, they retreated to their own room. Isaac pulled Lillian into his arms, and she sighed contentedly, resting her head on his chest. This was her favorite part of the day, these quiet moments when it was just the two of them, the rest of the world shut out. "Do you think we will have more children?" Isaac asked, his fingers playing with her hair. "Maybe," Lillian said. "Would you like more?" "I would," Isaac admitted. "But only if you want to. I know it is hard on you." "It is hard," Lillian said, "but it is also wonderful. I love being a mother, and I love watching you be a father. If we are blessed with more children, I will be grateful." Isaac kissed the top of her head. "You are an amazing mother. And an amazing wife. I do not know what I did to deserve you." "You stepped forward when no one else would," Lillian said simply. "That is all it took." As the years continued to pass, their family grew. Lillian gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas, and then another daughter, whom they named Emma. The house was always full of noise and laughter, the sound of children playing and arguing and making up. It was chaotic and messy and absolutely perfect. Isaac expanded the ranch even further, hiring a couple of hands to help with the work. He became a respected figure in the community, known for his fairness and his generosity. Lillian continued her business, and her preserves became so popular that she could barely keep up with demand. Together, they built a life that was rich in every way that mattered. One summer, when Daniel was 10 and Sarah was 7, a new family moved into a ranch on the neighboring property. The Carters were from Texas, a young couple with 2 small children. Isaac and Lillian welcomed them warmly, helping them settle in and offering advice on how to manage the challenges of ranching in Wyoming. The 2 families became fast friends, and their children played together constantly. It reminded Lillian of the community she had longed for as a child, the sense of belonging and connection that she had never quite found in Boston. She was grateful for it, grateful for all of it. One evening, as she and Isaac sat on the porch watching the sun set, she said, "I think this is what happiness looks like." Isaac smiled and pulled her close. "I think you are right." The children grew older, each developing their own personalities and interests. Daniel was serious and responsible, eager to learn everything he could about ranching. Sarah was creative and dreamy, always drawing or writing stories. Thomas was adventurous and fearless, constantly getting into trouble. And Emma was sweet and gentle, with a love for animals that rivaled her father's. Isaac and Lillian watched them with pride, guiding them, supporting them, loving them. They made sure the children understood the value of hard work, the importance of kindness, and the strength that came from family. When Daniel turned 16, Isaac gave him his own section of land to manage, a piece of the ranch that would one day be his. Daniel threw himself into the work with the same determination his father had, and Isaac could not have been prouder. Sarah expressed an interest in becoming a teacher, and Lillian arranged for her to study with the schoolteacher in town. Thomas talked about becoming a lawman, inspired by the stories his father told of the old days. And Emma dreamed of opening a veterinary practice, a rare ambition for a girl, but one that Isaac and Lillian encouraged. As the children grew into young adults, Isaac and Lillian found themselves with more time to spend together. They took long rides across the prairie, visited the hot springs in the mountains, and sat by the fire on cold winter nights, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. One evening, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac gave Lillian a gift. It was a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers. Inside was a letter, written in Isaac's careful hand. Lillian opened it, her eyes filling with tears as she read, "My dearest Lillian, 20 years ago, I stood in the street and watched you step off that stagecoach, and I knew in that moment that my life was about to change. I did not know how or why, but I felt it in my bones. When no one else stepped forward, I did, not because I was brave, but because I could not stand the thought of you facing the world alone. I thought I was saving you, but the truth is, you saved me. You brought light and warmth into a life that had grown cold and empty. You gave me purpose, hope, and a love I never thought I would find. You are my partner, my best friend, my everything. I am grateful for every day I have spent by your side, and I look forward to spending the rest of my days with you." With all my love, Isaac. Lillian pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Isaac," she whispered, "that is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." Isaac took her hands in his. "It is the truth. You are the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me." They kissed, and it was like the first time all over again, full of promise and passion and an unshakable certainty that they were meant to be together. As the years continued to pass, they watched their children grow into adults, marry, and start families of their own. Daniel took over the management of the ranch, allowing Isaac to step back and enjoy a slower pace. Sarah became a beloved teacher in Rock Springs, shaping young minds and inspiring a love of learning. Thomas became a deputy sheriff, following in his dreams of upholding the law. And Emma, against all odds, studied with a traveling veterinarian and opened her own practice, becoming the first female veterinarian in the territory. Isaac and Lillian became grandparents and then great-grandparents. They watched the family they had built spread and flourish, a legacy of love and hard work that would endure for generations. One warm spring day, as they sat on the porch of the ranch, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Isaac turned to Lillian and said, "We did all right, did we not?" Lillian smiled, her heart full. "We did more than all right. We built something wonderful." Isaac took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every time." "And I would choose you," Lillian said. "Thank you for stepping forward, Isaac. Thank you for saying I do." Isaac leaned over and kissed her, gentle and sweet, as the sun set over the prairie they had called home for so many years. Around them, their family laughed and talked, the sound a symphony of love and connection. And in that moment, Lillian knew that she had found exactly what she had been searching for all those years ago when she boarded that stagecoach in Boston. She had found home. She had found love. She had found everything. Years later, when both Isaac and Lillian were well into their 80s, they still took their evening walks around the ranch, their steps slower but their hearts just as full. The ranch had passed to Daniel, who ran it with the same dedication his father had, and the house was always filled with family. One quiet evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, Isaac turned to Lillian. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Lillian thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the scared young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, about the uncertainty and fear that had gripped her heart. She thought about all the years since, the challenges they had faced, the joys they had celebrated, the family they had built. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Not one." Isaac smiled, that same smile that had made her heart skip a beat all those years ago. "Good. Because I do not have any either." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating in unison. They had lived a good life, a full life, and they had lived it together. That was all that mattered. When the end came, it came gently. Isaac passed first, peacefully in his sleep, with Lillian by his side. She held his hand and whispered her love to him, her heart breaking even as she knew he was finally at rest. The family gathered for the funeral, and they laid him to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch, a place where he could watch over the land he had loved so much. Lillian lived for 2 more years, spending her days surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of Isaac and the life they had built together. She never stopped missing him, but she took comfort in knowing that he had lived a good life, that he had been loved and had loved in return. When her time came, she went peacefully, a smile on her face. Her last thought was of Isaac, of that moment when he had stepped forward and said, "I do." She had been so lost then, so afraid, and he had given her everything. They buried her beside Isaac on the hill, and the family gathered once more, tears mingling with laughter as they shared memories and celebrated a love that had endured through every trial, every joy, every moment of their lives together. The ranch continued to thrive, generation after generation, a testament to the love and hard work of the man and woman who had built it. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the sagebrush and the stars sparkled overhead, it was said that you could feel their presence still, watching over the land and the family they had created, their love eternal and unbreakable. The story of Lillian and Isaac became a legend in Rock Springs, passed down through the years as an example of what true love could be. It was a story of courage and kindness, of a man who stepped forward when no one else would, and a woman who had the strength to take his hand. It was a story of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a life that was richer and fuller than either had ever imagined. And it was a story that would endure, just as their love had endured, a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who heard it. Daniel Flint stood on the porch of the ranch house many years later, his own grandchildren playing in the yard, and looked out at the land his father had worked so hard to build. He thought about the stories his mother had told him, about the day she arrived in Rock Springs and the man who had saved her. He thought about the values his parents had instilled in him, the importance of family, of hard work, of kindness. And he thought about the love they had shared, a love so strong that it had shaped not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. He smiled and turned to his wife, pulling her close. "We have a legacy to uphold," he said. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "And we will, just like they did." And so the story continued, generation after generation, a testament to the power of love, the strength of family, and the courage it takes to step forward when no one else will. The ranch stood as a monument to that love, the land stretching out in all directions, just as it had when Isaac and Lillian first built their life there. The house, expanded and improved over the years, was still filled with warmth and laughter, still the heart of a family that valued connection and community. And on the hill overlooking it all, two graves stood side by side, marked with simple stones that bore the names Isaac Flint and Lillian Flint, and beneath their names, a single word that summed up everything they had been to each other: forever. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the echoes of a love that had changed everything. A love that had started with a single act of courage, with one man stepping forward and saying "I do," and a woman who had been brave enough to say yes. It was a love that had built a home, raised a family, and created a legacy that would endure for all time. And it was a love that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step forward and offer a hand. And that true love, once found, is a force that can overcome any obstacle and endure any trial. Isaac and Lillian had found that love, had lived that love, and had left behind a testament to its power that would inspire generations to come. Their story was one of hope and courage, of kindness and determination, and of a love that was, in every sense of the word, eternal. And so, in the quiet of that evening, with the stars beginning to twinkle overhead and the prairie settling into its nightly rest, the spirit of that love lived on, woven into the very fabric of the land and the family that called it home. It was a love that had changed two lives, and in doing so had changed countless others, rippling out like waves on a pond, touching everyone it reached. The story of the male bride who no one wanted and the cowboy who stepped forward saying "I do" was more than just a story. It was a reminder that in the darkest moments there is always light, that in the face of rejection there can be acceptance, and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of kindness. Isaac and Lillian's love had been that light, that acceptance, that kindness. And it had been enough to build a lifetime, to create a family, to forge a legacy that would never be forgotten. As the night deepened and the stars shone brighter, the ranch settled into silence, the land holding its secrets and its stories close. And somewhere, in the whisper of the wind and the rustle of the grass, the echo of two hearts beating as one could still be heard, a testament to a love that had conquered all, a love that had endured, a love that would never, ever die.